everyone.
Okay, it's 2 o'clock and I'm going to call this meeting to order. We're going to have to go through some of the same things we went through already, just because this is a different meeting with a different call-in. So I'm going to turn it over again to our clerk to do a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Present.
Councillor Foster. Councillor McElwain.
Present.
Councillor McCrae. Councillor McCrae.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kittredge.
Present.
Councillor Dunsmore.
Present.
And Mayor Linton. Okay, we do not have Councillor Foster in the meeting currently. Do you want me to try and connect?
So we're gonna try to get Councillor Foster back here. So please hold. We'll be with you shortly.
Present.
Okay, Councillor Foster, you're here, right?
Yes, present. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, now we did the roll call and ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act with anything that we're going to be speaking about on this agenda. Okay, seeing none, I have a recommendation of the council of the, firstly, we did have a closed session and there's no matters to bring to open session from what we talked about in closed. Confirmation of the agenda that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington confirmed the agenda for its meeting held June 15th, 2020. Mover, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that is carried. So we'll move on to consideration of reports. Again, the purpose of, before we get to the main purpose of this meeting, we're going to first talk about the Economic Recovery Plan. And I'm going to turn things over to Pat Rutter, our Economic Development Officer, to do a little bit of an intro before we hand things over to one of our members, Don Vallery. So Pat first.
Thank you, Mayor Linton, Council. At the April 9th meeting of the Economic Development Task Force, the first one that they had since the closures began in mid-March, it became clear that the closure would be longer than anyone had anticipated, and that many of our small businesses would need support to withstand the situation. The task force decided at that time to create an economic recovery subcommittee in order to monitor the local situation and determine how best to support the businesses during and after the closure was resolved. The subcommittee has members from the Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Center, the BIA, and local business owners, along with council and staff. The subcommittee met weekly and developed an action plan that was endorsed by the full Economic Development Task Force at its meeting on June 4th. The action plan, as it was developed, sets out 4 objectives for support of the business community during the reopening and going forward. So the first objective was safe access to businesses, which included the need to ensure physical distancing and accommodate the businesses' need to reopen, and has resulted in the street closures in Elora and the upcoming one in Fergus, and were done in consultation with the respective BIAs. The associated logistical issues around the closures and the need for signage to inform local residents and customers, as well as the logistics to providing safe public washrooms for those local residents. The second was a safe customer experience, which included making sure that local businesses had access to the information to safely reopen, including access to information on who could supply local equipment and PPE to equip local businesses for the reopening, including barriers, hand sanitizer, and masks. The third objective was around financial assistance, and the first item was the County of Wellington's Keep Well loan program, which they initiated very early in the closure, and 39 Centre Wellington businesses benefited from that loan program. The objective also was to assist businesses in understanding what programs and initiatives were available to them, and to ensure that they were aware of Centre Wellington's decisions to help with financial issues, such as tax deferrals. We also wanted to ensure that we were hearing what local businesses needed, and we're referring that information onto upper tier governments for responses. The fourth objective was around marketing and promotion support, providing access to training and support for local businesses through the Small Business Center and the chambers, the Shop Local Centre Wellington website, which assisted in providing access to businesses to still continue to do some business during the closure, and hopefully assist in some cash flow to those businesses during the closure. A Win This Space initiative is proposed if we need to necessarily fill some commercial space later in the year. And the final initiative is a Support Local Centre Wellington campaign based on the rainbows displayed in both downtown Fergus and downtown Laura. We intend to provide some materials to spread that even further into the community and to continue that campaign going so that our local business community can thrive and grow now that the reopening is happening. The final initiative to discuss is the Support Local Centre Wellington Recovery Grant Program that I will let the chair of the Economic Development Task Force tell you about.
Great, thanks very much, Pat. And so we invited our chair of our Economic Development Task Force to come and speak to us today. And I'm just going to read the recommendation. I'm not going to ask for a mover or a seconder, but I'm just going to read the recommendation first to make it clear for council what the ask is right now, and then we'll let Dawn speak to it. So the recommendation reads that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington receive the Economic Recovery Action Plan as a framework to support the reopening of the local economy as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, and that council approve the creation of a Support Local Centre Wellington Recovery Grant Program and direct staff to negotiate an agreement with the Wellington Waterloo Community Futures to develop the program to assist local businesses in their recovery and reopening, and that council direct the mayor and clerk to sign such an agreement. So that's what the recommendation is worded as, and now I'm going to turn things over to Dawn to talk about why the committee unanimously approved this to go to council. Dawn, welcome today.
Okay, thank you, and good day to everybody. Got some nice sunshine. Okay, so the Support Centre Wellington Community Grant Program, some of the aspects would be to assist local businesses in reopening and recovering marketing aspect, and building and make that so it can move forward. So as we move through this, stage 2, stage 3, the marketing thrust will be a little bit different, and funds will be needed to refocus things as we go through. Some small businesses are hit by the closure, and the length of closure has been really devastating to a lot of small businesses. And we can see in our community businesses that just won't be back. So this is to assist businesses that are existing and help promote themselves through marketing. The other thing is the details of the plan are, the program would get run through the community futures. So Waterloo Wellington Community Futures over between Fergus and Laura, we thought was a great way to roll this out. They have the ability to take in applications. They have ability to handle money. They have ability to collect money. It's sort of what they do, and us being part of that would be really good. Would help deliver this quickly and effectively. So a couple of the details are, someone could apply for up to $3,000 if, as a grant from the municipality. They would have to put in 50% of that in cash themselves. So somebody got $3,000, the whole program that they would propose then would be $4,500. Waterloo Wellington Community Futures would be willing to give them another 50% of the original amount, so another $1,500. So all of a sudden you have a $6,000 program that they can use to promote their business and to help them get going and get back to normal. They have to demonstrate the ability to sustain this, so that we don't just give them money and they disappear. So they have to put a proposal forward to the Waterloo Wellington Community Futures, and it would go through an approval process there. Where we are right now, I think Pat is, correct me if I'm wrong, is we are in the process of we'd like to get permission to negotiate with the Waterloo Wellington Community Futures so that we can get this program rolling. I think that's sort of the lay of it. It just, for instance, just think of a flower shop. The guy's got $1,000 to buy flowers for the next week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, and he needs $2,000 or $3,000 worth, so he can actually make some money to actually perpetuate his business. This would give him that little leg up to help get him past that startup place, because all these guys are just running out of money. So that's so part of this, the 3,000 grant, 1,500 would be what the person would put in, and then a possibility of a $1,500 no interest loan for a period of time. And that's what's going to be negotiated with Waterloo Wellington Community Futures. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Don. One of the reasons that we wanted to move ahead on this is the county moved ahead on its Keep Well program, and it provided loans for businesses, and they did it in combination with Wellington Waterloo Futures, and the process worked really well because the Community Futures group is well set up to do the evaluation. If they have established criteria, that's what they do. So we wanted to do something that was a little bit more similar to that, but recognize that people are kind of tapped out as far as taking on additional debt. So that's why we've been pushing. The recommendation before us right now is a grant versus a loan project, because some of our businesses are really struggling that way. I'm going to turn it over to Council, but I'd like Councillor Van Leeuwen and Councillor Dunsmore to talk a little bit about this. They're our representatives on the Economic Development Task Force. So if I could turn it to Councillor Van Leeuwen first, and then Councillor Dunsmore, just give us your thoughts on this and how it will be a positive impact on business. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, it's definitely, it's an interesting program, and it's a program that that is designed specifically to boost companies forward. One of the things that companies struggle with is a lot of times advertising money and how do they work forward with things like that. I really like the program because the amount it's small enough that with the 50,000 we can target a lot of companies. I mean, and it's also local. There's a lot of times you get government programs that are broader, further out, harder to manage, harder to facilitate, and the local company just gives up and says, I can't fill out all that grant paperwork. And I really like that this is designed and targeted to the local community. It's Centre Wellington born, Centre Wellington targeted, and it should be something that's very easy to manage. So I'm excited about it, and I think that we definitely want to see that our local business continue to roll and operate. So that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So it's been capped at $3,000, so we can maximize it. I'd be particularly happy to see that members of the Economic Development Committee insisted that the businesses had skin in the game. So this wasn't a case of they come knocking and we give the money. They have to match. They have to have money to put forward so that we know that they're serious about what they're doing. It is imperative that we get assistance to our local businesses to keep our local economy strong. And they've suffered a fair bit through this. They've been open now for about a week, some of them 2 weeks, and they need to recover. And this is one way to help them get their marketing and their digital advertising out there so that we can keep people coming to them and get some local shopping there. So that's my thoughts on it.
Great, thanks, councillors. Okay, so let's go around the table. Any questions or your comments on this? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to speak in favor of this program. It's going to help small businesses, and that's a good thing. The CFDC, the Community Futures Development Corp, that is their business. As you mentioned, Mayor, I'm guessing they're getting funding from Industry Canada for this. One of the good things is we're leveraging 50,000 local dollars with funding from Industry Canada, or perhaps the province, I'm not sure which. They both fund these CFDCs, so the other levels of government are helping to fund this program, which is good. And it's a direct lifeline support to small businesses in our community. So I'm in favor of committing the 50,000 of Centre Wellington dollars to this program to support our small business. I wonder, Don.
Okay, yep.
Don, can you hear me?
Yep. Who is it?
It's Bob Foster. Don,
Okay, Bob, yep. I can hear you now.
If I may, Mayor, ask a question, I just want to be clear on something. Don, if you could clarify for me the sources and the structure of this program on a per applicant basis. I think what I'm hearing is the small business applies for a total of 6,000 of funding. 3 comes from the CFTC. They have to put 1,500 of their own in, and the last 1,500 is from the township. Could you just clarify the structure of that application?
That's not. Yeah, it's not quite right. It's 3,000 up to 3,000. So it might be 1,000. It could be 2,000.
Right.
But up to 3,000 from the township as a grant. Then they put in 50% of their own money. Then 50% of the original amount. If it's 2,000, it would be $1,000, or if it was 3,000, it'd be $1,500. The CFTC will loan them interest free, and I don't know what the terms are. That's actually what we're asking is to be able to negotiate this stuff. And then at that point, when we negotiate it, we will give the CFTC the criteria that we want to make sure that it gets to the proper businesses and they get the right amount. Okay, the small businesses, they've had such a hard time, they can't take on a lot of debt. A lot of them are really strapped, and this would, I'm sure, help a whole bunch of people.
Councilor McWayne?
Thanks, Kelly. It looks like a great program, and you're absolutely right. The small businesses need something like this to get started, and I'm really happy to see it's a grant instead of another loan that they are going to have to repay at some point. Just a couple of questions. One of them had to do with the restaurants in town and having to build, in some cases, build an extended outdoor patio and stuff like that. Is this grant going to be able to address that situation?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer that first, and I'm gonna pass it to Pat to make any additional stuff. That was one of the initial opportunities that we saw here. So in addition to potential marketing or promotion dollars, we wanted to specify that if a restaurant wanted to put this money into an outdoor patio, that they could do that. So this is definitely to help them out on this front. And, we've talked a lot at the task force and at the BAAs and with council about wanting to see sidewalk patios in our town. And we see this as an opportunity to do that. So anything to add to that, Pat?
I just wanted to specifically say that the grant program will say that restaurants can use it for patios, and that includes furniture or umbrellas they may need for that. We have also talked to a company here in Ontario that does provide what they call portable patios that meet all of the requirements of the AGCO and the building code, and they have given us an exceptional price. And restaurants may be able to use that, and it would all come in within that $3,000 grant amount, and then they could use the additional monies to furnish those patties, etc. And a lot of those will be able to stay up throughout the season.
Councilor McWayne, follow on?
Thanks, Kelly. On the portable patios that you were just referencing, Pat, have you also looked at the kind of patios they have in Barrie, which are less portable, but they include the sidewalk so that people walk around them out to the street instead of having pedestrians between the patio and the establishment? I'm just curious of price and flexibility and such.
That's exactly the business that we're looking at exactly provides that kind of item. The good thing with them is they will bring it in, they will set it up, and they will take it away at the end of the season and provide the storage. They are offering us an exceptional price, considerably lower than they would normally offer this time of the year, around $2,000 for a patio. And they would they would create the walkway around it in a parking space, just exactly like Barrie is doing.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions about the funding and where the funding is coming from. Is it an addition? Is it from the Economic Development Reserve Fund? And why was $50,000 decided to be a max?
I'll turn it to Andy for the initial question. If we want to talk about the $50,000 piece, then we can maybe talk to either Pat or Don. So I'll turn it over to Andy first.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. So the funding is coming from our capital reserve, not the economic development reserve. So we're not tapping into any additional funding from there, which we've allocated for the, as everyone knows, for the new employment lands. So this would just be like any other capital project or project that we've done. We would have our reserves for our capital, and we're just tapping into that for the $50,000. So as projects go over or under, in this case, we've got a lot of projects this year coming in under budget. Those funds flow back to the capital reserve, and that's where we're going to be taking the money from. As far as the $50,000, it was some discussion in the committee about what was a reasonable amount. And I think with the additional component of using the economic development marketing funds, so that's other part of the component, the action plan that the township is also looking at additional funding from our own marketing to things like the Rainbow project and things of that nature to assist with Shop Local program that Pat has already set up the website for. So I'll turn it over to Don to speak to anything else.
Don, did you want to talk anything more about the $50,000 mark? Because I know we had a discussion about it at the committee.
Yeah, we've talked about quite a few things, and keep in mind it is up to $3,000. So it could be somebody wants to do the restaurant thing for $2,000, and then they would have to put $1,000 their own money in. So now you'd be able to create a whole restaurant for $3,000 with furniture and stuff. So it doesn't have to be 3,000. We're kind of hoping that there's more smaller ones so we can help more people a bit. But if somebody needs that kind of amount, we've sort of put a top end on it. Yeah, but it's really good. It would be really helpful. How many businesses we can save or help out, I don't really know right now, but we'll see with the application process once it gets out and gets advertised.
Councillor Kitch's following.
I was wondering about the allocation. Is there any a reference that some is used for Elora, some for Fergus, some for Bellwood, like just the allocation? I was just wondering, is there any formula for that?
Not
No,
right. I hope not.
No.
The idea is that it's all based on criteria that is overseen by a group outside of the township. I think that's pretty clean that it's coming from a certain group of criteria, and another group that is overseen by a board of directors provides the process that these applications go through. I think that's a lot cleaner process, and it worked really well at the county perspective with the Keep Well program. It never came. The political stuff was never a part of the process, and I think that's the way it should be, personally. Councillor Kitch's following.
Will the area be all of Centre Wellington and not just in the BIAs?
All of Centre Wellington.
Yeah, all of Centre Wellington. Yeah.
Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Mayor Linden. I'm certainly thrilled to hear what we're doing locally to help our local businesses. I guess a couple of questions I have related to it is strolling down the Elora district on the weekend, seeing all the patios up and running. It was thrilling to see.
when are we going to open another public washroom? Because there were some large lineups at the Bissell Park public washroom on the weekend. Second question, I also saw a lot of hand sanitizer being used on the weekend. Has there been any consideration given to maybe the township doing bulk purchases of hand sanitizer that we can then turn around and sell to the small businesses so that we get bulk purchase discounts? Because I'm sure all the small businesses are suffering from having to pay for hand sanitizer when you see some of the prices that are being paid. And then finally, the last question is, I know there's a number of provincial and federal programs out there to help small businesses to get an online presence. Are we providing staff support to help them fill out those forms to apply for that funding as well?
Okay, so 3 questions there. The first one related to a washroom. I don't know, Andy, if you can speak to what we have plans for washrooms in the area. And then the other 2, I'll pass it over to Pat, because I know the committee had some discussions and she could be supported by Don if there's anything else that he wants to add to that. So I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. So Bissell Park, as well as the tourism office, was open this Saturday in Aurora. And our intent is to be having the Fergus washrooms open for the closure of the streets this weekend. So all of our washrooms in our downtown core are all open. I will tell you that the one in the tourism office is reduced capacity because to meet the guidelines for the health unit, we actually had to do it so that instead of 2 stalls, we can only use 1 stall at a time. So there is reduced capacity, but the washrooms were open this weekend, and the other washrooms are all going to be open for the openings for the closures of the streets, as well as Bissell Park was now, I think, in our 3rd or 4th week of being open.
With regard to the other questions,
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
we have talked about having the county assist with the purchases, bulk purchases of things like hand sanitizer and masks. That's been under some discussion with them. I don't know if they're going to continue with that. We had looked at some ability to add hand sanitizer to in our downtowns, but we haven't proceeded with anything on that just yet. With regard to the government programs, they're not particularly us staff at the township, but the chamber is assisting people. The small business centers are assisting people. The new digital Main Street program that additional funding was announced for. We do have a digital squad that is assisting businesses to do that through the small business center. So there is assistance for them in terms of being able to ask questions and assist with paperwork. The CFDC also assists with that.
Well, Councillor McCray, were you talking about creating brand new washrooms in addition to what we have open now, or?
No, I was just, I knew that we had Bissell Park open, and I knew that that the one at the tourist office hadn't opened yet, that there was some, I guess, changes happening to reduce capacity. But I'm wondering, are we also going to put porta potties back in place like there used to be 2 at Victoria Park in Elora, whether or not we're going to put those back as well?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. And I know there's some direction that we've received on the province for that, but I'm going to let Pat speak to that. Pat Newsom, not Pat Rutter.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. So with respect to portable potties, we have not received clear direction from the public health unit as far as their cleaning, sanitizing, if we have them installed. We're waiting upon that information either from the Ministry of Health or our local public health before we install any porta potties. Once we do get that direction, then we look at putting those back into Victoria Park. We're also opening, just to add on to that, next weekend, the ECC Center has washrooms on the outside. That parking area is designated as overspill parking for the downtown. And so those washrooms will also be opened on Saturday.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, so let's just go around the table again. Let me know how you're going to vote. Actually, I'll get a mover and a seconder first. So I read the recommendation. Can I get a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. So I'm going to go around the table again and let me know how you're voting on this, and if you have a couple last remarks, that'd be great. Councillor Foster.
I vote in favor, Mayor. I think it's a good thing to support our small business, so I'm voting yes.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
I vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Councillor McWayne.
I vote in favor, and the sooner the better.
Councillor Kitchus.
Yes.
Councillor Dunsmore.
I vote in favor.
I vote in favor.
And I vote in favor of this as well. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really help our downtown businesses. So thanks very much, Dawn, for coming and talking to us today. And we'll get this moving as fast as we can.
Yes, thanks to everybody, and we'll get it going as quick as we can. And thanks for your support. All the best.
Thanks, Dawn. And just correct, I don't mean just downtown businesses, all businesses across Centre Wellington is what I meant.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dawn.
Yes.
And that recommendation passes. Move to 8.2, reopening protocol and procedures. You have a report in front of you. I'll let our CEO speak quickly to that and answer whatever questions you might have. Andy?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So before you is protocols and procedures that we pulled together for our administration offices as we look to reopening our various services and our facilities over the coming weeks and months. We've been reaching out and looking at the guidelines set out by the province as well as our own Wellington Health Unit. And so you'll see in the policy or the protocols and procedures a number of links to other documents. And I was just on the site this morning. A number of those documents have been updated even since we began reviewing these with just more information and additional details to help businesses open up their offices. So we are looking at this various procedures outlined in Appendix B with regards to how we're going to be operating within basically our staff locations and offices. So including the municipal offices, the information offices in Pilkington, fire administration, and our tourism offices, specifically the staff areas that may be open to the public. Appendix B lays out a number of different things with regards to screening and personal protective equipment, and there are items that are being installed currently. Our barriers should be installed this week or early next week, including screening of people coming into the building and the requirement to wear masks. Hand hygiene, making sure our staff and everybody in the building do use the sanitizers and wash their hands on a frequent basis. I think this is the number one piece that we've heard from the health unit is the more frequency we can have encouraging people to washing their hands. That's the best way of stopping the virus continuing. Our plexiglass and glass are being installed as we speak this week and next week, as well as looking at other facilities down the road for recreation facilities. Ensuring the physical distancing over 2 meters in locations where we're not going to be able to do that within staff as people leave their offices or their desk areas. Masks will be required for staff through the building when they're not sitting at their desk. Township vehicles, if you've seen our staff driving around, we were at the initial stages trying to keep everybody to a single vehicle, but as more work is needing done on the outdoors especially, we do have protocols here for staff to be able to continue working in a vehicle with wearing masks together. As we've heard throughout this whole virus, cleaning and making sure we're sanitizing the areas and stepping up our cleaning procedures. So we're going to be doing that within all of our buildings, and especially the touch services that we do have for the public and for staff. We set out a clear process for handling and receiving packages. A number of these things we've already initiated as part of even the protocols while we have been closed. So we've just added those to our protocol for when we're reopening. Cash handling, again, another thing outlined by the health unit, really increasing the amount of use of debit and credit instead of cash purchases. Just about out of province and country travel, out of country travel. So it's about a self-monitoring if you travel outside of the province in Canada. But if you do move outside of the province or Canada, you do have to self-isolate for a period of 14 days. We're working with our staff about use of our lunchrooms and various shared spaces, ensuring that we do make sure that our staff are protected, and then we're cleaning those facilities and making sure that, encouraging at this point for staff to be working and eating their lunch at desk. And also, as we move forward this, there are still a number of staff through a phased approach that will be continuing to work through at home in order that we don't have a full amount of staff working in our buildings, thereby allowing more space for us to be physically distancing from one another and encouragement of future Zoom meetings and looking at future openings of looking at the first stage would be really only opening to appointments only, and then a future reopening of the building when we have everybody back in our buildings. So this was just more of an operational kind of guidelines to ensure that everybody is aware. And at the Appendix C is really a lot of the signage coming from the health unit as well as Public Health Ontario with regards to the guidelines for people to be following and ensuring that we're keeping everybody in the building, not only our staff, but our public and council protected as we look at reopening over the coming weeks and months. So this was really just more of an information, just making sure that we do help communicate this out to the community and to council to make sure that we're protecting our staff and everyone in our building and helping to do our part to make sure that the COVID-19 virus isn't spreading any further. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Andy. Get a mover and a seconder for this recommendation, and then we'll go around the room if anybody had any comments. Recommendation of the Township of Centre Wellington received report CAO 2020-06 titled COVID-19 Reopening Protocol Procedures, Municipal Administrative Offices for Information. Mover for that report, Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor McElwain. We'll go around the table. Councillor Foster?
No comments, Mayor. I'll vote in favor of receiving it.
Thanks. Councillor Van Loo?
This is good to see. It's similar to what all our individual businesses had to do. Look at how their process and policies and how we deal with customers and cash and everything. So I'm glad to see you take into account all the different divisions and sections and buildings. And so I'm in favor. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain?
No comment, Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. I was wondering when exactly, there's no time on this. It's the protocols, but there's no time on it. I was wondering when the McDonald building was opening, the McDonald Square. Exactly the time. Because it has all these protocols, but you're working on them, but is there a date for all the openings?
Andy?
Yeah, thank you, through Mayor Lynch. And we have not picked a date at this point in time. We're still trying to make sure we have all these protocols and equipment and things in place. We've been talking to the health unit with regard to different office spaces. And as we're seeing some municipalities slowly starting to open, a number are still keeping their doors closed. And so we're trying to review whether next stage will be looking at possibly some appointments for booking for services that can't be received online. But in the most cases, a lot of our services are online and are working out very well. and we've had very little interaction needing to have to be taking place face to face. So that's something that we'll be looking at, not only for administration buildings, but all of our other buildings, and announcing dates as we move forward.
Councilor Pierce, follow on. Councilor Dunsmore?
No comments. I'm in favor.
Councilor McCray?
No comments. Very well thought out, so I'm in favor.
Thanks very much, Councilor. I'm in favor as well. Thanks very much, Andy and the team. I can't say enough about the leadership that we've had at the township level and all the staff pulling together. It takes a lot of work to pull this together. I mean, it's one thing to look at other municipalities and what they're doing. That's part of the work. The other thing is what's going to work in Centre Wellington, and then what's being allowed from the province. So there's so many different factors that have to go in this. So thanks for spelling it all out. I know a lot of work has gone into it. So thanks very much. And that motion carries. So moving on to 8.3, budget directions report. So we finally got the biggest piece of our agenda today. And I know this is our first meeting regarding the budget. So it's important that staff receive some direction from council so we can get into budget deliberations with that context in mind. So without talking too much about this, I'm going to turn things over to Dan Wilson, our Treasurer and Director of Corporate Services. Dan?
Thanks, Mayor Linton. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we are going to walk council through that basically outlines the key content of the report.
Terry's just working, pulling that up, Dan.
Okay, perfect. So the purpose of the report and in this meeting, staff are reaching the point where, based on the budget timeline we had last year and having a similar budget timeline for the 2021 budget, we're getting to the point where we have to start preparing the 2021 draft budget. So similar to the process we went through a year ago, at this point, we're looking for overall high-level direction from council in terms of the initial development of the 2021 draft budget. So we do have 8 sections for discussion, and we have 8 recommendations in each area. And just keep in mind that these are recommendations, and these are items that staff need direction on to move forward with this initial draft, and obviously each area will be discussed in further detail. If not in future pre-budget meetings, it'll be discussed in budget deliberations. So if we want to move on to slide 3, each of the discussion areas that we have here, inflationary adjustments, assessment growth, fees and charges, OMPF funding, dedicated capital levy and OCIF funding, development charge funding as it pertains to capital projects, capital funding, and the budget schedule itself. So going into section 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the entire presentation for council, and then I believe we're going to walk through each section individually after that. Section 1 is inflation, and as we discussed a year ago, the township's tax-supported operating budget has costs that are incurred that are affected either by operating inflation, capital inflation, or no inflation at all. A good example from a capital perspective would be we have transfers from our operating budget to capital reserves to fund capital projects, where those capital projects typically increase at a rate equivalent to capital inflation. It makes sense to consider increases to those transfers to reserves based on capital inflation. Most of our budget does get impacted based on more operating or CPI related indexing, but we do have some costs that change at other rates. A good example of that is insurance. We seem to have insurance increases from year to year that are quite a bit higher than inflationary adjustments. So we do have two indexes here that we're looking at, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, from an operating perspective. And we have the Non-Residential Building Construction Price Index, our NRB CPI, from a capital perspective. And I know that's typically, NRB CPI is typically focused on buildings, non-residential buildings, but it is the standard index that municipalities use to assess capital inflation from year to year. And a good example of that is that we use that index to inflate our development charges from year to year as per the DC Act. Moving on to the next slide. So this is a 10-year historical look at Consumer Price Index. Not surprisingly, you can see that it's dipped down quite a bit going into the first quarter of 2020. We're currently at 0.7% operating increase year to year from quarter 1 2019 to quarter 1 2020. Lowest point it's been in the last 10 years, but that's I guess what we're expecting based on what's going on right now with COVID-19. The next slide is the Non-Residential Building Construction Price Index. It's down as well compared to a year ago, but not by as much. And this is typically what we see. Capital costs typically don't get impacted as radically as maybe operating costs may do. So you can see that that's gone down from the 3.3% we had in 2019 to 2.9% going year over year from January to January. Now, taking those two indexes and combining them in the next slide, we have a weighted index. Similar calculation we did a year ago, where we take the operating costs from the most recent budget and use the operating inflation factor, in this case 0.7% for CPI. We're using the capital index for our transfers to capital reserves, both internal and external. And we have the debt payments, which are not impacted by inflation whatsoever. So when you do a weighted average of all of that, you get a weighted index of 1.4%, which is down significantly from a year ago when we were talking about the 2020 pre-budget meetings. This calculated it out at 2.7%. So 1.4% is the recommended increase in taxation, at least for right now. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. What we're suggesting is that we use that 1.4% as a benchmark to calculate out the draft tax-supported operating budget for 2021 before adding on any dedicated capital levy impacts for the year. So this is a very similar approach that we followed as part of the 2020 budget. Section 2 is assessment growth. So we have a lot of areas, most service areas in the township that are impacted by assessment growth. So this is where we have new residents, new businesses, new assessment coming into the township, which results in more roads, sidewalks, water, wastewater mains, the need for more water supply, wastewater treatment, stormwater management, parks, sports fields, playgrounds, programming such as swimming, seniors related, and then more administrative, customer service, bylaw enforcement, processing of tax bills and tax inquiries. So growth does play a significant impact on the services provided by the township. And we do have additional provincial downloading that happens from time to time, and regulated reporting requirements that seems to increase from year to year that provides additional strain on the township as well. So we did keep with the philosophy of growth paying for growth in this directions report. This was a strategic direction provided by council as part of the approved strategic plan. And it's also a best practice in terms of budgeting. If you're going to have additional revenue come in from a taxation perspective with respect to assessment growth, it makes sense to use that newfound revenue to pay for the impacts of growth on a budget from year to year. So we are suggesting again going forward that growth pays for growth in 2021. And in our case, in this particular presentation, we're talking about tax-supported or assessment growth. The 10-year average for our assessment growth is at approximately 2% growth per year. We did have slightly higher than 2% growth last year. I believe we were at 2.23%. Final assessment growth was put in place for 2020. We don't expect it to be any higher than that, given the constraints going on right now with COVID-19 and MPAC going through and assessing various properties. So we'd like to use 2% as a benchmark for now going forward, and we can obviously update that when we get additional information from MPAC going forward. So we do have operating costs that are impacted by growth, and then from a tax-supported side, we want to try to account for those as much as possible through assessment revenue from a tax perspective. Obviously, water, wastewater is a separate entity in itself, and it's self-sustaining and not impacted by tax dollars. From a capital perspective, growth is typically paid for through development charges, which we'll discuss in a future slide. So the proposed resolution is to assume assessment growth of 2.0% for now. That growth will pay for growth within the 2021 budget, and we'll set up and structure the 2021 draft budget that way for council to review, and that we will update actual assessment information when we receive it in November, so that we have more up-to-date information for budget deliberations, but we just want to use the 2% for now for draft budget purposes. Section 3 is fees and charges. So we do pass fees and charges bylaws annually as part of the budget process, and it does have a fairly significant impact on our operating budget. We have service areas like Parks and Recreation that heavily rely on revenue coming in from fees and charges to offset the tax subsidization in that department. We typically look at increasing this area by inflationary levels. So our initial recommendation, at least right now, is to do that as part of the preliminary draft 2021 budget. But obviously, there's a lot going on right now with COVID-19. We don't know if there's going to be an impact on user fees, the cost of user fees, and the ability to provide user fees in 2021 because of COVID-19. So we're going to be closely monitoring that. But we need a starting point so that we can start working on the operating budget now. So our recommendation in this section on the next slide is to use that weighted index we talked about in section 1 and plan for a township increase in fees and charges of 1.4%. But if we have pressure in certain areas for rates to either be increased at a higher or lesser rate than 1.4%, then staff will bring that forward to council as part of budget deliberations. Section 4 is OMPF funding. So OMPF is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. We receive these funds from the province annually. Goes into the tax-supported operating budget of the township. You've heard us say this a number of times, but we've experienced significant decreases in OMPF funding since 2009. And in recent years, it's been about 15 to 20% decreases annually for this funding program. And the province has not committed to the funding allocations for 2021 at this point. This is the graph showing the township's OMPF funding since 2009. So you can see it's gone from 1.54 million down to what we're receiving this year of $271,700. So quite a significant decrease in OMPF funding. And based on current calculations and formulas for OMPF, it's to continue to reduce annually until we hit this minimum threshold of around $40,000 or $50,000, I believe. So what we're proposing for the preliminary 2021 budget is to use the allocation we received in 2020 and reduce it by a further 15%. That would get us an allocation for 2021 of $230,900. And use that for preliminary budget purposes until we hear actual amounts from the province when they release that information. Section 5 is the dedicated capital levy and OCIF funding. So these are the major funding sources used to fund bridge and major culvert rehabilitation and replacement. We have the dedicated capital levy piece that we've seen increases to the township's base levy for a number of years now. We're to the point where we're reaching the maximum combined target funding level for bridges and major culverts, which is the combination of dedicated capital levy funding and OCIF funding of $2.8 million. So right now we're estimating that the increase to the township's tax base is to be about 0.5% for 2021, which compares to the 2% increases that we've been doing year to year for the last number of years. So this is the final partial year of the dedicated capital levy to get us up to that target funding level of $2.8 million. The 0.5% is an estimate at this point based on information we have to date, and it's going to be approximately in that area. OCIF funding, like I said, is currently under review by the province. We received roughly $1.271 million in 2020. So we're going to anticipate around that amount for 2021 until we hear different from the province. This is the historical combined dedicated capital levy, which is in blue, and the OCIF funding in green, and how that has increased since 2015 when the dedicated capital levy was introduced. And you can see that by 2020, we're almost at the $2.8 million combined, which shows why we need just a partial year in 2021 just to get it to us to that funding level. And you can see how this has been a really much needed significant funding source for bridges and major culverts for the township. So we are proposing that we plan for a 0.5% increase to the base taxation levy for 2021 to represent the dedicated capital levy increase for the year. So adding that number to the 1.4% we talked about in section 1 would be a combined target increase in taxation of 1.9%. We're also planning for the preliminary estimates for 2021 OCIF funding to be maintained at 2020 funding levels until we hear differently from the province. Section 6 is development charges. So this is a significant funding source for our capital budget, both tax supported and wastewater supported. It was roughly 6.3% of our capital funding in 2020. In the recent past, we've been planning for approximately $1.5 million in DC funding to fund capital that is considered growth in nature. What we have to do is monitor cash flow as part of this, because if you think about it, we have capital needs that are needed to accommodate growth, and those capital needs are typically needed early before growth actually happens, and then growth happens after that capital forecast, after that capital is actually built. So from a cash flow perspective, you need the money to do the capital works, and then the DCs come in afterwards. So we're always juggling DC cash flow when it comes to budgeting capital projects. What we'd like to do is continue with the $1.5 million in annual capital funding from development charges within the 2021 budget. We are still seeing DCs coming in 2020, regardless of what's going on with COVID-19. We have a strong DC reserve fund balance as a whole right now, and we're currently updating our DC background study and bylaw this year, so we don't see a need to change the annual allocation of $1.5 million as of right now. So our resolution is to include approximately $1.5 million in growth-related capital projects to be funded by development charges in each year of the draft 10-year capital forecast. Section 7 is capital funding. So this is excluding development charges and obviously excluding the dedicated capital levy and OCIF funding that we talked about earlier for bridges and major culverts. This is our primary funding source for tax-supported capital budget. We have our vehicle and equipment replacement reserves. We have the general capital reserve. We have federal gas tax, and we have OLG funds. And that combined together typically makes up a substantial amount of our tax-supported capital funding from year to year. When it comes to our vehicle and equipment replacement reserves, we did a consolidation of some of these reserves back as part of the 2020 budget, where all tax-supported vehicle reserves were combined into one, and all tax-supported equipment reserves were consolidated into one. And that gave us the ability to really reduce the amount of additional funding required in each of these reserves going forward. Because if you think about it, as one department has an increase in demand, maybe other departments have a less of a demand for vehicles or equipment, and we're able to work together in terms of funding peaks in vehicles and equipment replacement. So as a result, what we're looking at for 2021 is a $60,000 combined increase for vehicles and equipment from a replacement perspective. And a year ago, I think we were asking for about $125,000. So you can see there's been a significant savings in that consolidation, and I think it's one of the major positives that came out of the 2020 budget in terms of really finding efficiencies in these reserves. From a general capital reserve perspective, we do have an existing balance of roughly $2.4 million, but with that, there's roughly $514,000 remaining in a loan that was loaned from the general capital reserve to pay for bridges. I think it was about 4 years ago, one particular bridge. We have a minimum balance as per our reserve policy of $1.1 million that has to be maintained in this reserve. And this is because we use the general capital reserve for contingency purposes. If we have unforeseen capital or projects that go over budget or any other contingency matters that come up, the general capital reserve is a source of funding that we can draw on. So we set a minimum reserve balance, and as of right now, it's sitting at $1.1 million. So that gives us a total of $807,000 sitting there today from a general capital reserve perspective. We are recommending that the transfer in to this reserve as part of the 2021 budget be increased to $875,000. It's currently sitting at $850,000, so that's a $25,000 increase. And we're proposing that minimum balance of $1.1 million be increased to $1.2 million, just so that we have a little bit more of a cushion there when it comes to contingent matters from a capital perspective and a reserve perspective. So adding these two adjustments into play gives us roughly $1.582 million from the general capital reserve to go into the 2021 budget. Federal gas tax, we have a 2021 allocation that's already been committed to the township of $894,082. And we have $57,168 unused from previous years. And this is from capital projects that came in under budget. It's from interest earned on the federal gas tax reserve fund. And I believe we received an administrative adjustment from AMO on additional gas tax funds received by the township. So that adds up to roughly $57,000, giving us $951,250 in gas tax funds. OLG funds, this is where we need to do some estimating at this point and need to follow up on this when we have better information. But we do have a policy that approved the allocation of OLG funds that was put into place last year. We did commit to reviewing that policy as part of this budget process, so we'll be doing that in the not too distant future to make sure that we are happy with the allocation of OLG funds. But just keep in mind that it's funds received in 2020 that get spent in 2021. So we're not spending OLG funds until we actually have it in the bank. We are expecting 2020 OLG proceeds to be reduced significantly from 2019. And just to show you a brief calculation of that on the next slide, this is what we're using, at least from a preliminary perspective, to anticipate 2020 OLG proceeds that will be available for the 2021 budget year. And again, this is a high-level estimate at this point, and we can refine this further when the facility actually opens and we start figuring out how much proceeds are actually going to be coming into the township. But we did receive a first quarter amount from OLG of $572,700, so that's sitting in the bank right now. We're anticipating that second quarter will be zero, just because the facility is closed and remains closed at this point in time. We did an assumption, we completed an assumption of third quarter, 374,400, representing half of the 2019 third quarter. And we're using 100% of the 2019 fourth quarter for our fourth quarter 2020, which is 677,900. That adds up to $1.625 million, and compare that to what we received in 2019 of 2.74 million. We're over 1.1 million under what was received in 2019. But just keep in mind, this is initial estimates at this point, and we're going to refine the 1.625 million as we get additional information from OLG. Using the policy that was put in place a year ago, and obviously this is subject to change based on review with council, 88% of the OLG funds received would go into township capital projects. 7% would go into economic development, and arts, culture, and heritage would get 5%. So you can see the first column here would, if the policy did not change, we'd put roughly 1.43 million into capital projects, 113,000 into economic development, and just over 81,000 into arts, cultural, and heritage. The second column are amounts unused from 2019. The big amount there for economic development is the fact that we did have a significant allocation based on the 7% allocation policy that went to the Economic Development Reserve Fund in 2019 that was not used. If you recall, the policy does say that the maximum amount to go into the capital projects portion, which is the 88%, is $2.2 million. And once you hit that 2.2 million threshold, the remaining funds went into economic development. So it did result in an unused balance carry forward from 2019. But keep in mind, we do have annual commitments now with debt payments for the employment lands up on Dixon Drive. So we need to make sure we can fund those debt allocations through this reserve. So when you add in the unused amounts from the OLG funds, we end up with roughly 1.9 million in funds available, and 1.45 million of that is for township capital. So bringing all of that together for 2021 budget, and this is excluding the vehicle and equipment replacement reserves, which are sort of left alone to the side and self-sustaining. We have roughly 3.984 million in capital to go to, in funding to go towards tax-supported capital. That is quite a bit lower than what we had a year ago. We had 4.899 million a year ago for the 2020 budget. That was predominantly because we had a full year of OLG reserve fund proceeds of 2.2 million, and we had a doubling of gas tax funds in 2019. So that resulted in a significant increase in funding for 2020. So we're back down to roughly 2019 funding levels of around $4 million. But I just would like to note that we are still below the asset management recommendations for capital funding for 2021. So we're going to continue to estimate capital funding in this using this approach. So roughly $4 million in combined funding to go towards the tax-supported capital budget. We are proposing the $60,000 increase to vehicle and equipment replacement reserves. And then as part of the budget process, we also monitor specific reserves that fluctuate from year to year based on use. The WSIB reserve, insurance reserve, contingency reserve, and legal reserve. And they get topped up based on our approved reserve and reserve fund policy through the budget process. So we'd like direction from council to continue to do that. And we do have a plan to bring forward the reserve fund policy to council revised in the foreseeable future as well. The last section is the 2021 budget timeline. So we are looking for approval from council to proceed with a timeline that is similar to the 2020 budget timeline, where we're looking for approval of the budget prior to the conclusion of 2020. That gives us some advantages when it comes to procurement and tendering of capital projects and vehicles and equipment early in 2021. We do get direction in a number of cases, a number of meetings from council through the budget process before we actually get into budget deliberations. And we do allow for sufficient public input as part of the process as well. So in terms of the timeline itself, we are currently at the first benchmark of June 15th, the first pre-budget meeting. The next meeting is set for September 8th, committee of the whole meeting, where we will start discussing the 2021 preliminary capital budget. On October 5th, we would do a further budget impacts report to talk about more detailed impacts to the operating budget. And at that point in time, we'd have our first set of budget delegations where the public can come in and speak to council on the 2021 budget. Within October, we would have a public information form released to the public to get additional information from the public on the budget and proposed spending levels. And we would have a budget open house currently set for Boyne Hall, 7 p.m. on October 21st. Obviously, we'll have to monitor whether that meeting will be in person or some other format. October 30th, the public information piece would close. November 20th, the draft 2021 budget book would become available. And then we would start budget deliberations on December 1st and 3rd. Have further budget delegations on December 1st. So again, the public can come and speak to council on the budget itself at that point. And we have reserved December 7th as a third day if needed for budget deliberations. And the last council meeting of the year is December 14th. So we'd be seeking budget approval on December 14th. So it is keeping a very similar schedule to the 2020 budget. Staff do have a lot going on, so it's fairly aggressive given the demands on staff right now, but it's what we're proposing at this point. All right, that concludes my presentation, and all staff are here, managing directors, Andy and Mark is here as well to help address any questions that council may have.
Thanks very much, Dan. It's great for us to see so much work has gone into this already. And I really like the process and the layout here. There's 8 very clear areas for council direction laid out here. And so I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this and appreciate your presentation today, Dan. The way that we're going to do this, we're going to go section by section, and this is our opportunity as council to provide some specific direction to our staff so that they can work away on the budget. Because we want to be as efficient as possible in their time spent on budget, because we know that's coming while they're doing a lot of other tasks right now. So this is council's opportunity to provide some direction. So we're going to go section by section, and I'll go around the room for each section. If you don't have anything to say about a particular section, you don't have to feel like you have to make stuff up. That's the way to do it, to keep some order to our discussion today. Before we're going to start that, we're going to have a 10-minute break, stretch your legs, and come back at just before 3:30, okay? All right. Okay, it is now 3:30, and hopefully that looks like we have everybody back here. So now we'll go into our discussion portion. So as I mentioned, we'll go each section by section and go around the room a couple times. So the first section where staff are requiring direction from council is section 1. Maintain a tax rate increase equal to or less than the calculated weight index, currently 1.4%, before adding on the dedicated capital levy impacts. Okay, so that's a very clear direction from staff, and let's go around the room. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. We all know we're in the middle of a pandemic. I've spoken at length about lost revenue. I have spoken about how many citizens are receiving the CERB. There's unemployment in the community. There's angst in the community about the ability to pay bills. And this is the year, I believe, for a 0% increase. We cannot continue business as usual with ongoing tax increases as though nothing has happened. I note in Dan's presentation, inflation this year is, the CPI in particular, is basically zero or a little bit more than zero. So this is the year that I'd like to see a 0% increase. We've always, or during the pandemic, we've looked for ways to help our citizens with, we did a 60-day deferral. We've changed the due dates for the balance of the year. Wouldn't it be a great way to help our citizens if we were to be able to table a 0% tax increase? And so those are my initial comments. I think we need to strive for that objective.
Okay, Councillor Foster. Then this is not, we're not getting a debate right now, but if that's the case, we will be needing to provide some council with some direction on what sorts of programs to cut in the future. Moving on to Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks through you, Mayor. Yeah, I like this report that we received and how it's broken down very well. It's good. I really like how we took the different aspects of inflation and consumer price index and non-residential building construction price index. It gets us in that balanced effort where it's capital versus operating expenses. The one thing I feel a little bit comfortable with, and I hear Councillor Foster's note as well, is once we get to the end of the year, because this is a preliminary budget, so we're going to get a crack at this when we get near a little further into the year, that if we said, hey, let's go with the 1.4, let's see how the taxes come in, let's see how people's jobs come back in the economy, and when we get closer to the end of the year, we can actually, if there are some hard decisions to be made, then we can make that decision then. But right now it seems to be a fairly good number to start with to give staff direction for sure. So that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain.
Thanks, Kelly. I guess the one line item in section 1 that I question is, in order to maintain 2020 spending limits or levels. I tend to agree with Bob's thoughts that I don't think we should be maintaining 2020 spending levels for 2021 because we have a lot of families in Centre Wellington who just can't afford to the higher rate of taxation. I think that we should be questioning whether we need to be maintaining the 2020 spending levels. And with that, if that is the determining factor, it creates a different set of criteria for staff to work with than it does if you're looking at something less. And so I agree with Stephen that we have opportunities later to adjust our thoughts, but on the other hand, if we ask staff to go ahead with a set of criteria today, that's going to be what they use to do all of their calculations going forward. And so today is probably the day we have to decide, is this really what we want to do, or do we want to adjust downwards and try to help our citizens recover somewhat from losses in 2020? That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Kitchers?
Thank you, Mayor. I am very concerned about this increase. My experience of 6 years is that when the budgets are used by a certain percentage, it doesn't change in November. Very rarely, because a lot of work has gone into it, by the staff. So I think that saying later that we can change this, we have to determine this right now, as Councillor McElwain has suggested. I have trouble with the 1.4 because the attachment A has two different criterias. First of all, the consumer index is only taken for the first quarter, but the residential building construction is confusing. It says based on third quarter results, but it says in the little box 2020 January. So what is it? And if it's 2020 January, that was before the pandemic actually started. So we just last month experienced the ability to capitalize on paving more roads because capital costs went down. So as opposed to the confusion that I see in attachment A, I think there could be deflationary forces to play. And I would agree with Councillor Foster that we should probably, for the sake of the taxpayer that is paying the 2020 taxes but is not able to use the facilities, just last agenda item said we don't even know when we're going to open them up. So I just want to reiterate that a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people are not sure where when the recovery is going to happen, where their jobs is. Because of the government money to help boost the cash flow of Canadians and Ontarians and everything, when that runs out at the end of the summer, we might not know. And so I think we should not be putting pressure on the regular taxpayer. I think we should be zero, again, as Councillor Foster has suggested. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kitchers. Councillor Dunsmore?
A quick question for Dan. In your hypothesis of the 1.4%, I remember when we looked at a update with the impacts of COVID-19, we had a list of capital projects that we were looking at pushing out. Does this 1.4% indicate, or is it reflective of those capital projects that you've moved, that you're planning to move, or we're going to move, so that funding isn't in here? That's the first question.
Through Mayor Linton, any capital projects we had identified as being deferred, the funding would have remained with the capital project and would be completed in 2021. So that is completely independent of passing this budget.
Okay, so then can you tell me dollar figure wise what a 0.4% would look like? Not 1.4, but 0.4% or 0.4% reduction in our budget. What the dollar value would that come to?
Sorry, Councillor Dunsmore, just for clarification, you're looking for a 0.4%?
0.4%, yes.
0.4% is roughly $58,800.
Okay, thank you. No further questions for me.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Considering we were at 2.7 for 2020 and we've dropped to 1.4, that seems to be a reasonable starting point to start with our budget. At the same time, I'm aware of the impact of COVID on people's employment, but we also have to consider our infrastructure continues to erode, fall apart. That was one of the reasons why we brought in the dedicated capital levy, was to address the shortfall in terms of our continuing to invest in upgrading and maintaining our infrastructure. So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that while trying to lower our tax rates to accommodate employment uncertainty, at the same time we have to ensure that we don't get too far behind the 8 ball in terms of where we should be in maintaining our assets. So 1.4 seems fine for me.
Thanks, Councillor. So there's a couple thoughts that I have. I completely understand the hardship that a lot of families and individuals and businesses have gone through. And I think that's why staff have pushed this down from a 2.7 to a 1.3 and then moved the capital levy from a 2% to a 0.5%. So there's significant movement there that staff have already made to try to reduce our increase. The difficult thing about providing direction to staff at this level, and I think it's really important that we do it, I'd like to have, and we're going to go around the table again, like to have additional thoughts from councillors. You're all very well aware of the service levels we have and where you think that staff should start to look at. I mean, we're not going to have a complete discussion on this, but I do want to give staff a little bit more direction than to get to a 0%, because what's going to happen in that case, they're going to get to a 0% and councillors are going to say, no, we didn't mean to look at that program. We meant look at this program. So any kind of direction that we could provide staff to provide some direction as to where you think we should be looking. We're not looking for anything that's finalized, but we need a little bit more on that one, because often when we come to council, it's not about reducing the prices, it's about increasing. And so now we're giving direction to staff. We have to be prepared to back that up politically when they come back to us with their thoughts on this. Personally, I would like us to see closer to a 1%. I think that given the situation that we find ourselves in and families find themselves in, I think we should be pushing for a 1% increase. I think a 0 is too far, and I think 1 is going to be tough to get to without sacrificing some of our service level in our programs. But I personally would be in favor of pushing staff to try to get the 1% increase in this budget, and to see how that can fall out over the course of our discussion. So that's my initial comments on section 1. We'll go around the room one more time on this one. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I can think of a number of areas where we could free up dollars. Firstly, I noted that I believe last weekend, in addition the week before, that tenders were issued for 2 vehicle replacements. One was, I think, a snowplow, and one was a landscaping truck. Now, we could have easily deferred those vehicle purchases. They were each presumably $300,000 or $400,000 for the snowplow, a little less for the landscaping truck. So one easy low-hanging fruit would be to defer all vehicle purchases for 1, perhaps 2 years. We could extend the life of them with repairs versus replacement. So there's an easy one, is to have a moratorium on all vehicle purchases. A second one is a moratorium on hiring consultants. We have excellent staff, and I've raised this matter before. Despite having excellent staff, we continually hire consultants to build a case for a decision or to study something. I think it would be a very wise thing if we proposed a moratorium on the hiring of consultants. Those are two easy areas that we could save some dollars, and that would get us to zero, if not even further. So there's two easy areas where we could save some dollars, and I think zero is the way to go. Because of the hardships in our community, I rarely hear initiatives coming from staff about how we could better control our operating costs. So all successful organizations do that, and we need to do it as well. We've got to do a better job of controlling our operating costs and increasing our capital funding.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Foster. I have to disagree with you a little bit about that. I hear about how staff save money all the time here, but maybe that's not getting around to everybody. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, through you, Mayor. Yeah, I don't mind it. Like, if we went to the 1% capital, I guess I'm kind of in that battle between, I don't want to fall back to the line where we start letting things fall behind. There is that deadly trap where you start to let things slip, and all of a sudden it starts costing you more money. I do run a business as well, and sometimes there comes the point, especially when it's used vehicles or used capital, where all of a sudden it starts costing you more money than it would to replace. And those are some of the traps I don't want to fall into, so we have to trust the staff to make some of those decisions in that regard. I actually would prefer that staff would come back and say, and this is why I felt strongly that if we did the 1.4, but if staff, while going through, said, okay, here's where we're at, and if we decide later that staff has a few we'll call it their lowest hanging fruit that to give for us for consideration as well. Otherwise, I think that we would start hacking at things that really I would need to see the whole picture, the whole plan on those trucks, and why was it in there, and why is that project there. So that's kind of why I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of the tiniest. So I'd rather leave it at where it is, and then have staff come back with that list, numbered list. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Scully. Yeah, I tend to agree with Stephen that us trying to identify areas where we could save money is probably not really the most efficient way to do it, because staff have a much better idea of that than we do. I think if we had an overall idea or concept in the township of every dollar spent, you have to identify a dollar of savings somehow, or that type of idea, much like you do in corporate environments where you're asking the corporation to invest more money in a project, then you better be saving that much money with the project. I'd rather see us do that kind of thing, and I think staff are much better equipped to do that than we are. The one area that I would suggest that we could certainly save money for next year is take the $500,000 that has already been allocated to a new operations center and delay that out. It certainly is not going to impact any operational aspects of the that's going to impact our residents in the short term. So that's one area where I could see that we can come up with a large hunk of money that would help bring that tax rate down to close to zero.
Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I haven't had really any feedback from the comments I made, so I would like to have feedback about the data and so that we're getting the correct data when we're making this decision. So that's number one. We shouldn't, it's not our decision to go through a budget and declare what items. The staff, when we give them the direction, they should be coming back on what they do have to staff have to cut. So that's sort of my view on that. I would just like to know why it's only on January for the non-residential, or is it the third quarter? Which one is it? And also, I think in an organization, and I also am a businessman, and when this happened, I had to cut $1.5 million in my sales. And so we reorganized the budget in 3 days to plan for how we were going to operate. And in every organization, there's a standard rule that you can cut about 10% and not hurt. And so I think that staff should be given that job to decide, or at least give us proposals on what could be cut. And I think zero increase is very achievable without losing any services. And I think this is inflated, inflational numbers. I think that is probably deflationary at the present time. And I think that many citizens would appreciate greatly that we maintain just the 2020 budget going forward. That would be a real statement of a commitment to the citizens that are, financially strapped. So I think that we should not wait if we decide to go with the lower one, and I think it should be zero. I think that staff should give us some options, and that we should meet, not the schedule. We can talk about the schedule later, but we should meet next month so they can give us some ideas of what would be cut. And I'll leave it at that.
So you mentioned something about numbers. I don't know what you're talking about, but maybe Dan does. You know what Councillor Kitchus is talking about?
Yes, through Mayor Linton, in attachment A to my report, we break down the historical consumer price index and non-residential building construction price index. So in that second capital index, in the header of the chart, it says based on third quarter results. So for all of the complete years, which is 2011 to 2019, the percentage shown is quarter 3 to quarter 3 percentage increase, because that's what's available as of the end of a calendar year. So when you get to 2020, as of last week, StatsCan had not released anything other than January 2020. So I'm using the most current data available, and we'll update that later for council's information.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Dunsmore.
The only concern I have about going to zero is the fact that our asset management plan, we've been consistently underfunded. So we've been playing that game of stretching that out to begin with. To go to zero is just going to put us into a deeper hole with that. And we're legislated now to manage those assets. You need to play a little bit of catch up there. I have one quick question, and I know we're not looking at details yet because you're just looking for guidance on what percentage, but I want to make sure that the people that came to council in February, the termite issue, and I know COVID hit us before we got a report back on that. I want to make sure that we get that report and get that on the table for the budget, for the next budget talk, so that we know that those numbers are in there as well. But I would really like to see this get down to 1%.
Yeah, I'll let Andy speak to that termite one. Councillor.
Yes, through you, Mayor Linton. So we are still trying to connect with Dr. Miles and getting his estimates and what his proposals are. He was one of the, he's off right now, but so we're still reaching out. Our hope is to have some information to the June council meeting, if not to the July. But we are working towards getting that so the council would have that before any final decisions on the budget.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I guess I'm still in favor of continuing with 1.4, but I'd be interested in staff coming back with a descending scale to 1.0 with the list of the services, et cetera, that we would need to cut in order to get to that 1.0.
Okay, thank you very much, councillors. I'm going to put a motion on the table that we maintain the tax rate increase to equal or less than the calculated weighted index currently at 1.40 before adding the dedicated capital levy tax, and request that staff come back with projects that could be removed or services that could be removed to get to a 1% increase. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor McCray, go around the room one last time, provide your vote for that motion. Please, Councillor Foster.
This is a time for leadership on costs. I vote no. It should be 0.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
I vote in favor.
Councillor McLean.
I vote no. I would like to see that change to say to try to attain a 0%, not a 1%.
Councillor Kittrus.
I would like to also change the motion so that it says that we get information from staff to go to 0. Excuse me. And so that's my thoughts on that. And I would say, as it sits presently, it would be a no.
Okay, well, we'll go through the voting process, and if it fails, then we'll go back to that other one, because that's not a friendly amendment. That's changing it significantly. Councillor Dunsmore?
I vote for.
Councillor McCray?
I vote for.
Okay, so that passes 1.4 with direction to staff to see what has to happen in order to get to a 1%. Okay, moving on to section 2. Assume assessment growth equal to 2% to be used to fund budget increases considered to be growth in nature, with assessment growth figures to be updated in November when received. So this is making sure that we have council's direction to choose that assumption of 2%. Correct, Dan? Okay, Dan's nodding. Anything you wanted to add to make that clear before I go around the table?
I'll just clarify what I said earlier. So we're looking. There's two pieces to this recommendation. The first is to use the estimate of 2% assessment growth, and the second one is to continue with the strategic direction of growth paying for growth.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's a very real possibility we may not have much growth going forward. Nevertheless, I'm basically okay with section 2 and the assumption of 2%. I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Yeah, I think it's a number that we put in there, and I'm good with that number there. It makes sense.
Councillor McLean? We lost Councillor McLean. He's trying to get back in now. There he is. Councillor McElwain's back.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. What's your discussion on this assumption of 2% for growth?
I voted against the your motion. So you asked me?
No, now we're on. Sorry, I didn't know when. I didn't notice when you went off. Now we're on section 2.
Back on the section 2.
Yeah.
No comment on that one. It's
okay.
Straight ahead.
Okay. Councillor Kitchus?
I was wondering on what basis they came up with 2%.
Through Mayor Linton, we used the 10-year average assessment growth just because trying to estimate assessment growth is very difficult. It can fluctuate from year to year. So just for our preliminary perspective, we want to use the 10-year average.
Councillor Kitchus, follow on?
I thought we always used a 5-year average. That's what we did last year.
Dan? Mark?
Mark, do you have anything on that?
Through you, Mayor Linton, the 5-year average is, if I can hear, is about 3%. I think we were wanted to use a 10-year average because it came out around 2% and a little more reflective of what we might see in this, given the COVID situation we're in.
Because taking it to a 10-year would have grabbed the recession in there, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the tail end of it.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm happy with the 2%.
Councillor McCray?
I think the 2% is a reasonable starting point.
Okay, that's great. So that no change to that section. Oh yeah, sorry. Let's get a mover in a second for section 2. Assume assessment growth equal to 2% to be used to fund budget increases considered to be growth in nature with assessment growth figures to be updated in November when received. Mover for that. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to section 3. Increase fees and charges for 2021 by the calculated township index, currently 1.4%, other than where pressure on rates indicates an alternative rate change. Okay, as a starting point, how are councillors with that? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. My comments about section 1 apply equally here. We're asking our citizens to pay more for a cemetery plot, more for an hour of ice time, more for an hour of floor time. It can't be business as usual with an assumed price increase year in and year out. We're doing the same things as we do every other year, increasing our fees by and building in an increase using inflation as a justification. I think we need to come through at a zero increase for fees, and I'd like to make a motion that we amend section 3 to be fees and charges at a 0% increase. So it's the motion to amend section 3 to 0.
I'll second that.
Okay, I can. I mean, if a motion's on the floor, a motion's on the floor. I would prefer to go through all council once before we get motions to the floor to get everybody's thoughts first, and then put your motion in the second round around there. I think that's the fair way to do it. But I can't do anything about it. The motion's on the floor. It's been seconded. We have a new motion to basically it's 0% fees and charges across the board. Is that
Correct.
accurate? Okay.
Yes.
And it's been seconded by moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Kittrus. Any discussion on them? Okay, so I'll call that to question. Councillor Van Leeuwen,
No.
Councillor McLean,
Yes.
Councillor Kittrus,
Yes.
Councillor Dunsmore,
No.
Councillor McCray,
No.
and I also vote no on that. Okay, so we'll go back to the original motion that's on the floor right now. It's assuming a 1.4% increase with the recognition, well, that's not part of it, but there is a recognition that the fees and charges will come to council as a separate bylaw. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks. Yeah, this one here actually speaks, this is one where I'm the most concerned about, because here's where fees and charges and things like that, we're going to see the most increased costs. For example, to facilitate any of these programs, you're going to have hand sanitizers. People, it's a whole new world of doing business when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I think that we will see an increase above and beyond to operate in these areas. I do like the section where it says, other than where pressure on rates indicates an alternate rate change. So I think that you're going to see some areas where if we look at it and say, we don't want to do that one, it does give the flexibility, but this is the standard that we're giving direction to the township, to the staff, to say, this is where you're going to go, and otherwise come back to us with your advice when you see a problem. And I think that that's good advice. It's something that I would give to my team. So thanks. That's my opinion.
Councillor McElwain?
I think at the very least, we should be keeping the fees and charges to the actual rate of inflation, the cost of living rate of inflation, not the alternative building, whatever it's called. I mean, that quote that, or that sentence that Stephen just mentioned about where there is where they can be adjusted based upon pressure, I think that's kind of implying pressure upwards versus pressure downwards. So I think we should be assuming a 0.7% at the maximum, not 1.4%, and staying within the cost of inflation.
Councillor Kittrus?
I agree with Councillor McElwain.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm okay with starting off at 1.4% and seeing what gets adjusted downward.
Councillor McCray?
Considering we've dropped from 2.7 for 2020 to 1.4, I think this is a good starting point. Also, further to what Councillor Van Leeuwen was mentioning, is we're likely going to see increased costs associated with providing services related to COVID-19, having to provide hand sanitizer, putting shields in place, having other PPE for staff. There's some challenges out there that we don't know about. Already when I've gone to certain businesses, I'm already paying an additional COVID-19 charge. So I think we need to leave it at 1.4 as a start.
Great, thanks, councillors. Just a comment on that. If we're not, I mean, it sounds great to reduce the fees and charges, but if somebody's going to have to pay for it. So if the users aren't paying, that means the taxpayer is paying for it. So it has to come from somewhere. So it's just shifting it from one to the other. So I'm in favor of this as a starting point, with the caveat that we will look for those areas where it's demonstrated that users, customers have an inability to pay those rates, and that will come through our fees and charges bylaw that we see every year. So I'm okay with this as a starting point. So I'm going to read the recommendation and call for the vote. Increase fees and charges to 2021 by calculated township index currently at 1.4, other than where pressure on rates indicates an alternate rate change. Have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. Going around the room to get your vote. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's shameful that they're increasing these charges in the middle of a pandemic when members of our community are struggling to pay their bills. I vote no. And Mayor, I think we need a recorded vote on this matter. So I'm calling for a recorded vote.
Okay. Clerk will record the vote after I record the vote. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
I vote in favor.
Councillor McLean?
I vote no.
Councillor Kitchus?
No.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yes.
Councillor McCray?
Yes.
And I also vote in favor. And I'll turn it over to our clerk to do the recorded vote.
All right, thank you, Mayor Linton. On the resolution with respect to increasing fees, Councillor Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
I vote no to increasing fees.
Councillor McElwain,
No.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittrus,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
That does in fact carry.
Sorry about that little detail. I was on mute. Assume an estimated OMPF funding allocation of $230,900, representing a 15% reduction from 2020 funding levels until actual allocation amounts are released by the province. And again, just as a starting point for staff, as far as that assumption goes, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm okay with this one. We really don't have much control over it. It probably doesn't even need to be here on the list. We can assume, we make the assumption, but we really have not much to say about it. So I'm okay with this one.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No comment, thanks.
Councillor McLean?
No comment. I vote to agree with this one.
Councillor Kitchus?
No comment, and I agree.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Agreed, no comment.
Councillor McCray?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, so I'll read it again. Assume an estimated OMPF allocation of $230,900, representing a 15% reduction from 2020 funding levels until actual allocation amounts are released by the province. Mover for that? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to section 5, increase the dedicated capital levy by at 0.5% increase of the base taxation levy for 2021, and that preliminary estimates for 2021 Cif funding be maintained at 2020 levels. Okay, so this is based on the years that we've been doing this program. We've indicated that there was going to be a reduction in this year. We didn't think it would be this much of a reduction, but it does follow through with what we've been saying from day one. In 2021, we would be reducing to 2%, and this is what staff have come with a recommendation to us today. And I'll turn it over to Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. Once again, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, increasing our charges, our taxes, and our capital levy. I've spoken about this matter many times. I think it's very misleading to call this levy a 2% levy. I had a constituent ask me, Bob, my levy's $100 and my taxes to the township are less than 1,000. Can you help me understand how that's 2%? I had to answer truthfully and say, no, it's not 2%. It's 10.5%. And here we are increasing it yet again in the middle of a pandemic. We're operating, as I've said, business as usual. Let's tax and let's spend as though nothing has happened. So I am opposed to number 5. And I think this is the year that we should eliminate the dedicated capital levy, because people's ability to pay it has been compromised, and I see no effort here to control operating costs. And had we been doing a better job controlling our operating costs in the past, we never would have needed this levy. And I think it's shameful that we're taxing and spending business as usual in the middle of a pandemic when many of our residents are unemployed. So I vote no to this one.
Councillor Miller?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah. I'm glad to see it coming down. It's actually, to be honest, it's one of the programs that I was most excited about way back when we started, was to get some of those funds set aside for bridge projects. Having and knowing that the province is going to look towards municipalities to use their capital projects to boost the economy in the future, I think that this is something we want to continue with. 0.5 is quite conservative.
Councillor Van Leeuwen, you knocked yourself onto mute.
Oh.
The last word you said was quite conservative.
Yeah, I'm quite conservative. I think that it's a conservative number, and I don't want to pull completely back. I think that this puts us in the point where we now have a good bridge building fund into the future, and it's 0.5% above last year's number. So, thanks. I'm in favor.
Councillor McElwain?
Keep forgetting which machine I'm using here, so I'm trying to use touch control when I should be using the keyboard. I have been against the 2%, which is actually, despite what Bob said, it's up around 15% almost now after 7 years. So but the fact is, that's been there, it's been approved, it's going forward, and we've hit our 2.8 million, so it's not going to grow anymore except by standard tax increases. So I have no objection to it, and the Cif funding we have no input to, so yes, it's fine with me.
Councillor Kitchus?
It's okay.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm good with it.
Councillor McCray?
Considering we've gone from 2% to 0.5, I think that should be recognized. I think the other thing to remember too is the reason why we started this dedicated capital levy is to try and address all the bridges that we've closed over the years. There's still a number of residents out there patiently waiting for their bridges. So for me, we stay the course and go with this 0.5.
Great, thanks, councillors. And I'll read the recommendation here. Increase in the dedicated capital levy by a 0.5% increase of the base taxation levy for 2021, and that preliminary estimates for 2021 Cif funding be maintained at 2020 funding levels. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor McCray, second by Councillor Dunsmore. Going around the room, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I noted in 2020 that the total of the levy was $1.4 million, and the total cost of the 30 new positions in the budget, once fully implemented, would also meet or exceed the $1.4 million. And so we're effectively taxing for bridges at the same time as we're increasing our payroll. And when you put the things together globally, we're no closer to our goal of infrastructure renewal when we tax and spend in this manner. So I've spoken about this matter in several budgets. You can put the money in different envelopes if you wish. You can put the money in different envelopes if you wish, but at the end of the day, taxes go up $1.4 million and our payroll is going up $1.4 million. So I'm opposed to this. It should be zero. It should be abolished.
Okay, so that's a no. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
All right. I'm in favor of Section 5.
Councillor McLean?
We've hit the 2.8 million now, so I'm happy to see that we're not going to have any more dedicated capital levy. I wish it was the 0.5 didn't have to happen this year, but it's part of a long-term program and it's there. So I will vote in favor of it.
Councillor Kitchers?
I'm glad it'll be over this year. I'm for it.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, it's good to finish it off. I'm in favor.
Councillor McCray?
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. It's good to see your bridges being rebuilt. And that passes. Okay, move on to Section 6. Include approximately $1,500,000 in growth-related capital projects to be funded by development charges within each year of the draft 10-year capital forecast. Okay. Dan, did you want to add anything to that? We've been going through things pretty quick. Do you want to add just a couple comments about Section 6?
Yeah, just to add on to what I said earlier. So we're always putting growth-related capital into the forecast based on cash flow restrictions, and based on our recent analysis, 1.5 million per year continues to be the appropriate number to budget for growth-related capital from year to year. That may change in the future once we finish our development charge background study, but we're suggesting or recommending that we maintain the 1.5 million for the 2021 budget.
Okay, thanks, Dan. We're going through a lot of items here, so I kind of like the update once in a while. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm okay with this one.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
This makes sense.
Councillor McElwain.
I'm okay with this.
Councillor Kitchers.
I have a question, but I don't know whether it's in this section or some other section. It's about page 43, where it says general capital reserve budget and capital reserve closed projects. And it says that we're borrowing money. Is that what it says?
Just give staff the opportunity to find the right page and be able to respond to that.
Do you want me to answer that one, Dan?
Yes, sure, that's great, thanks.
I assume what Councillor Kitcher's referring to is the other considerations column on page 43. It's in yellow.
Yes.
Yeah, what that is, the 1.4 million, we took a loan from reserves back in 2017 of $1.4 million in order to do 27 WG, which is a bridge on Side Road 20. The actual loan, since the bridge came in less than what we originally expected, the loan from reserves ended up being $1,250,000. So the document, the reserve document you're looking at right now, I think is from 2015 actually. So at that time, we thought it would be a $1.4 million loan from reserves. So all that really means it's like a commitment on the general capital reserve balance until that loan is fully repaid. And I believe the balance at the end of 2020 is targeted to be, I think it's $514,000. So I think there's 2 more years of repayment and that's fully repaid, which essentially frees up more general capital reserve money.
Thanks.
Councillor Dunsmore,
I'm for this.
Councillor McCray.
I'm for this.
Okay, read the recommendation, call for the vote. Include approximately 1.5 million in growth-related capital projects to be funded by development charges within each year of the draft 10-year capital forecast. All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to section 7. Moving on to section 7, allocate the following funding to draft budget. $3,984,500 combined general capital reserve, federal tax and OLG funds. An increase in funding of $60,000 to the tax supported equipment and vehicle replacement reserves. An allocation to WSIB reserve, insurance claims reserve, contingency reserve, and legal matters reserve as per the township's funding targets and the reserve policy. Dan, you want to just a quick overview of that section?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mayor Linton. So this is looking at the available funding for the 2021 tax supported capital budget. The general capital reserve piece is looking at existing funds plus the transfer into the capital reserve for 2021, which is proposed to be $25,000 higher than it was in 2020. Federal gas tax funds are based on the allocation committed to the township in 2021, plus any unused funds from previous years. And OLG funds are just an estimate based on where we think OLG funds are going to be at the end of the year, which are roughly $1.1 million less than they were a year ago. We're suggesting 60,000 increase to the vehicle and equipment replacement reserves. That's based on the schedules that were approved in the 2020 budget. And the allocations to reserves are as required per the reserve policy so that we have adequate reserves to pay for those types of expenses throughout the year.
Thanks, Dan. Councillors, section 7, Councillor Foster.
I'm okay with this one, Cal. I'm in favor of building the reserves, and so I'm okay with it.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
I am good with this.
Councillor McElwain.
Yes, I'm fine with this one.
Councillor Kittrus.
I'm fine.
Councillor Dunsmore.
I'm also okay with it.
Councillor McCray.
I'm fine with it.
Okay, I read the recommendation. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to section 8, the council approved proposed 2020 budget schedule. And I will ask, I think that's self-explanatory. It's all laid out there. Councillor Foster.
I'm generally okay with it, Mr. Mayor, but it does trouble me to some degree that we're going to approve the budget without complete 2020 figures, because we're going to do this presumably in December. And we won't know the full year impact in 2020 until, let's say, January. I wish there was a way we could address that, but having said that, I'm generally okay with the timetable.
Mr. Van Leeuwen?
I'm good with it.
Councillor McWayne?
I'm okay with that.
Councillor Kitchus?
Last budget in 2020, I pointed out that the figures were not complete. They were only till November. So when you get the budget, you can't actually use the actuals. There's no way to accommodate so you can actually make it a useful document. And so I'm wondering if there's any way that staff can accommodate so we get complete information. So it will either be delaying the schedule, which I don't think is the greatest, or is there any way that they can figure out so that we have a comparable with apples and apples instead of like not a complete year? Because this year will be the expenses and the revenues will be, we don't know what it's going to be like, so it's very important that we get the accurate information when we're deciding on the final budget. So I'm wondering if the staff can accommodate in some way to give us accurate information that's up to date.
I'll let Dan speak to this, but I know the challenge is that staff provide as much up to date as possible, but recognizing that the year's still going and we want to get the budget completed so we get good prices on all our projects. So I'm not sure what they can do differently. I know that you make notes on each item and identify why there's some outstanding and what the assumptions are behind why you can't take all the actuals completely as they're printed out there. I don't know what staff can do because most stuff is happening after our budget is passed. But you know, I can let you comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. Yeah, so it's exactly as you just explained. We don't really know what our year-end figures are until probably March of the following year. We have a number of transactions that are quite significant that happen subsequent to the year that impact the year itself. So other than delaying the budget a number of months, which I wouldn't advise, I don't really see a way of having actual numbers that represent a full year. Mark, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we could attempt to forecast the final month, but you know, we're under a lot of pressure just to get the budget numbers together. I don't know if staff-wise, if we have the resource to do that, especially given we're already down one staff for the rest of this year. That does help out on the budget.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm fine with it.
Councillor McCray?
I'm fine with it as well.
Okay, I read the recommendation. Can I get a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Well, thanks very much. That gets through section 8. We have one information item, and that is the Economic Development Task Force minutes. If there's any questions about that, that's there. Any questions about that? Okay. And the last thing we have is the motion to adjourn. Councillor Kitchus, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Have a good rest of the afternoon.